Great. Welcome everybody to our Planning Commission meeting for today, the 28th of July. Let's go ahead and get started with a Pledge of Allegiance. If you all stand and join me.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So for the prayer or thought, it's actually my turn. So I've asked myself to give a prayer or thought tonight. And I didn't have a lot of time this go around to prepare a lot of a lot of stuff. Go hit my usual sources with the old Davis County Clipper and whatnot. But one of the things that I did want to just kind of mention is that we just had Pioneer Day just this last week, which I think is a great way to recognize some of the founding of the cities and the settlements that we have today, that we know today. And so, just remember, Centerville, in a lot of ways, is still kind of a small town in a lot of ways, I guess you could say, but it started much smaller than it is now, believe it or not. Some of the founding families of Centerville, of course, were the Duell family, the Duell brothers, after which the creek is named over here. And then, of course, some of the main roads through Centerville are named after some of the early settlers of Centerville, the Pages, the Porters, the Parishes, the Chases, the Jennings, and the Lunds. Kind of those are your main ones, right? So those are some primary ones. I think it's also kind of nice as we go forward, our job as planning commissioners is to plan for the future, plan for growth. But at the same time, think back to, where have we been? Where are we coming from to help us kind of guide where we go so that it's not so maybe haphazard, right? We can think about, okay, this is what we've traditionally been, and maybe this is where that helps us guide to where we would want to go so that it's congruous, I guess you could say. So anyway, this really quick thought that I had about that, and I'll offer a really brief prayer. Our dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this beautiful day, for the opportunity we have to gather together as a planning commission to discuss the items on our agenda that are before the commission facing the city. We thank thee for the freedom that we have to be able to meet together like this and to share our thoughts freely. We ask thee to bless that we can remember the citizens of the city and do the things that are best for Centerville, and that will continue to make this a great place to live. And we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen. All right, let us move along. We've got the first item on our agenda has been scheduled for a public hearing. It is a legislative recommendation. I like that change. It's good change. This is a zone text amendment to discuss internal ADUs, and we're going to turn the time over to Corey for this one.
Thank you, Chair Daly. Members of the Commission, in your previous meeting, you've seen some early drafts. We had some discussions about internal accessory dwelling units. By way of not being too repetitive, but at least for the record, and by chance, if we have viewers, at least they can get a brief of why we're here. First, you're very aware that the 2021 state legislative session amended the Municipal Land Use Management Act, and it now defines what cities have to do with minimum requirements for internal accessory dwelling units. Internal, under the state definition, is inside the primary home, and so this is not addressing any detached or accessory building uses of accessory dwelling units, but it is internal to the main home, which we list as the primary use or in the primary structure. The state legislative requires all cities to allow them. Just some parameters. At least 75% of your single-family zones you decide how you're going to distribute it, but at least 75% of your single-family zones, we have to allow them. Many cities are not going that route. They're just simply allowing these in their single-family zones. Part of it is trying to find a fair criteria to exclude a certain area for most cities. I think it's a lot easier when you're dealing with a college town and housing, particularly off-campus housing, where that might be applicable. So most of the recommendations that we get in our training as planners is probably not worry about separating 25% out unless you really feel like you have a reason or a model that you're trying to accomplish. The other statistic that's being spread around is the surveys of other cities who have already adopted the ADUs. They're finding that it's not above 1% of the single-family housing population. So although cities are allowing them more and more, it's not something that comes in, at least far as we know to date, as a rush of new types of housing. Now, I caveat that we all know that housing is going up and going up and going up and going up. It seems like it's a never-ending change within a 6-month period. Don't know when that's going to cap or change. I don't know if accessory dwelling units will be a more aggressive model for individuals needing housing. So we have a lot of unknown into the future, but right now it's a low threshold of how many actually do it. The other thing that the state legislature did is said, okay, we understand that we're going to require cities to do this, but there was a lot of debate about short-term rentals, particularly Grand County, Moab, Park City, some other areas that deal with short-term rentals. As you know, short-term rentals are still sitting on kind of the back burner of the state legislature on what to do. There's a debate on how they, are taxed, how hotels are taxed, what does that mean, what's the consequences. So they've held off in addressing short-term rentals. So it's just up to your existing zoning ordinance whether you allow them. A lot of advice is if you don't allow them, probably wait for the state legislature before we start doing things that make the state legislature take more and more progressive opportunity against municipalities. We don't allow them other than your commercial and zoning areas. So one interesting thing about short-term rentals, just by tangent, we cannot use their websites, Airbnb, VBRO, as part of our evidence gathering against them. That's an interesting thing at the state legislature. So you have to find other types of evidence, which becomes even more difficult.
Is that a statutory requirement or a?
I don't know how they list it in the code, Lisa may know, but it's
Yeah, I think it's in the
specific.
statute that you can't, it's not quite the evidence, but you can't fine them for
Can't
just advertising. That's not against the law in Utah to advertise for rent, but if you have other evidence, then you can rely on that.
So is it evidentiary issue as opposed to like a legislative issue? Is it?
Now, my recollection is just that it's not unlawful to advertise, and you can't just use that, I guess, as a violation. You have to find other reasons that someone's actually renting it. It's almost like, I'm thinking about committing a crime. I haven't committed the crime yet. So I'm happy to look up the statute, but it is statutory and.
That was just purely I was just really
Yeah.
curious. It seemed odd, so I was wondering if that was a court mandated limitation.
No, that was.
No, it was a
that
legislative. They
did
definitely
that.
wanted to say, wait a minute, there's all these people advertising and that's not actually, is that the crime? I don't know.
Can you find them that way and just send them a friendly reminder? Hey, this isn't allowed. This isn't a fine. This isn't a citation. This isn't a whatever, but friendly reminder, not allowed.
I wouldn't go there. I think the indication from the legislature is, we're not going to consider that anything. So if cities are worried about it, even in Centerville, we only work on a complaint basis. We're not out there looking.
Yeah.
So if somebody has to complain, and then we would investigate.
Yeah, okay.
I can think of a lot of, extreme cases where somebody could advertise illegal activities. So you're saying, that's a side
It's-
note. It's
it's-
all right.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, we cannot always explain the rationale of the Utah legislature. I appreciate the attempt.
I can think of a few examples, they're probably not appropriate.
yeah. But why the tangent's important is the state statute for internal ADUs defines ADUs to be used 30 days or longer. So that's why that becomes important to distinguish between short-term rentals and ADUs. So it's internal ADUs are intended for rents greater than 30 days at a time. So that's an interesting twist on it. The other thing that the statutes do, and again, I'll explain the left hand and the right hand, so small tangent. Typically, for single family and duplexes, you're aware of some applications, we can't regulate the design elements of the buildings. But in the statute of the ADUs, it says cities can regulate the single family character of the ADU. Not sure exactly. I think that, I asked the question at a conference training, and our legislative attorney rep, she just looked at us and said, as Lisa, we can't tell you what the left hand and the right hand are doing, state legislatures. So,
Is that just them saying if it looks like a duplex, more like a duplex, that doesn't fit? what
into
the
this,
ADU
into the single-family
And then it
neighborhood
becomes
concept.
a little bit of a gray area depending on what that duplex may or may not look like?
Right.
That's what you're getting at?
Right. So I do introduce an optional for the design elements. I think I'm hanging on that clause that we can do the single-family character. I'm not going forward just saying, look, you have to use so much rock and you have to use so much brick in percentages. It's basically saying, look, if you're doing an ADU and whatever you might do with the ADU or the addition to your home for an ADU, whatever the existing building architecture is like, we expect that kind of same existing architecture, rather than call out specific percentages of materials. So that's something to think about. I think it's a good thing. Part of my concern as a planner is, although ADUs can be form of housing, if they get to a point where it defaults to duplexes 10 years, 15 years down the road, that's a concern of changing single-family nature character. So that leads into the owner occupancy requirements. This state does allow us, it doesn't define owner occupancy. It just says they have to be owner occupied. And so we've had that debate at this level with the commission. Lisa and I worked out some minor edits to that. We feel comfortable with the simplicity of it. We changed from like the 50% ownership to the 25% ownership, because we're basically saying, hey, it can't be divided up into 100 scenarios, and we just start placing people because we gave them a coupon to join the company and define them as owners. So we backed off the 50%. That was kind of the model. And part of the also reasoning is if you have a family with some kids and they put it in a trust, we've talked about that. So maybe, 20, 25%, we started batting that around and felt comfortable landing somewhere in that area. So that's how we change the owner occupancy. The other elements that you can do is require the parking for the primary unit as well as one additional parking for the ADU. Our standards do that. They also define some violation and enforcement parameters inside the statute, so that's referenced in this new ordinance. So I think you're pretty familiar with the ordinance as a whole, so I didn't plan on going through line by line with the ordinance. If you will allow me, I'm addressing it now officially as a zone text amendment. And so we need to go through that zone text amendment process. There are 4 factors listed in the process. 3 of them are dealing with map amendments. The last one is it consistent with the goals, objectives, and policies of the general plan? So I call out the moderate income housing adopted and updated in 2012, and I think in 2014, I'm not sure, or 15. We call out in our moderate income housing to look at accessory dwellings within the city. That was one of our goals, primary goals. You'll notice that we mentioned that we would look at the design and layout of the ADUs to make sure they're compatible with the single-family neighborhood. So fortuitously, we were thinking maybe the state, I don't think we were thinking the state would get into that. We just fortuitously thought about that ahead of them. The other thing we call out is that they may be considered conditional uses. I think this is a significant change in this ordinance. I used the opportunity of may also be considered conditional use because this was the idea of we'll step into the water, see how cold it is, see what happens, maybe use the conditional uses. But now that the state's requiring us to do it, has a set of parameters, I'm suggesting we make it a permitted use just like the state. And I've done it one step further, allow the zoning administrator under the permitted use provisions, which are similar to your conceptual site plan application. They make an application to the zoning administrator, and we do the exact same thing you're doing at these meetings at that level. Looking at the ordinance, making the findings, making the decision, and then it's appealable to the Board of Adjustment in case the zoning administrator gets a little wonky on the approval process. So, but I think we have some pretty straightforward expectations. And so I don't know if you're comfortable with it or the council is. My reasoning and rationale is if we go to a public hearing process and ADUs can seemingly be very controversial to the public, if the assumption is that we're permitting and allowing them and then you go ahead and allow them, there's a perception that nobody's being heard. And I think this is a little bit different than just somebody coming in with a site plan or a new use or something that we're looking at. The state saying you have to do this. So the opportunity for a no is substantially compromised. And so we just need to be clear with our ordinances, and if we are clear with the ordinances, allow it to be administrative approval. But I'm not married to that concept. I just think it's a good idea. We also have in our transportation, we did a year ago, where we adopted an implementation parameter of ADUs. And we began, again, dipping our toe into the water by saying along our major corridors, we would add ADUs along our corridors. That was the idea, that this would be a step and see how it goes. So I think we're fulfilling that, but we're using the state statute to go even more than dipping our toe in the water. We're complying with state statute. So the advantage of that is that in our report at the end of the year, if this passes, which it should in some form, it's one mark on the Modern Income Housing Plan that we advance the cause of housing in Centerville. So for good, better, or worse, we get to do that. And then the idea, adversely affecting adjacent property, the argument is the design parameters are trying to mitigate that. The owner occupancy, the robust owner occupancy definition and covenants are doing that. As far as the character, the design elements are doing that. Infrastructure with existing homes is available for that. So one unique thing that's added to, since we're using existing homes, is how do we address density and the impact fees to infrastructure. Density would be a nightmare. You know, we regulate in the single-family zones really 4 units an acre, or 2 units an acre if you're in agriculture. Trying to create a new model and a calculation that qualifies the density when a single family can have it, and if it's, you know, it's anything above a 6,000 square foot lot in our ordinance that follows state statute. You know, how do you make that density distribution equity among different sizes of lots throughout the town? And so trying to create a density calculation seemed really difficult to implement and argue and for people to understand. So it's just 6,000 square foot lot or bigger with a single family home. You can have an ADU, doesn't count towards the density because of state statute, and we're allowing them. The other about impact fees, the idea of modern income housing is to create opportunities. I think the state legislature was involved in modifying your construction codes for the state and your fire codes for the state to try to reduce the burden of how ADUs are defined versus a 2-family. That means whether you have to put in the sheetrock that separates the units, whether you have to put the fire dampers in the air conditioning system, and all those. They're basically saying, no, it's not a 2-family dwelling. That goes away. And so I've kind of taken the position that charging an impact fee and trying to model and remodel our impact fees to justify park, fire, would be a heavy burdensome too, because our impact fees are to match the impact that's being created. You probably could argue some impact. Now, is it a full impact? If it's accessory, is it a full impact that a home would be? Yes and no. Yeah, building parks, it's based on our, expected single-family, multifamily growth. It just seemed another burdensome thing and doesn't make it's already, in my mind, going to cost $50,000, $75,000 to construct one if you really want to make it a livable unit. And so we start adding the impact fees, we start upping the price of the housing. You look at an elderly couple trying to maybe use this to supplement their fixed income, that gets expensive for them. If you look at a young couple, and young is relative, because I'm 56, I'll just disclose that. I feel young, my kids don't think I am. How does it help you supplement your mortgage if you have to take another mortgage to have the ADU? So it seemed like, let's just leave it to trying to encourage affordable housing and know that it will probably 1 or 2% will take advantage of it, and we'll check out through time how that impacts the city. So that basically ends my presentation for the record, and I am happy to answer some questions and allow you to decide whether this is at a level today to move on to the city council for recommendation after you conduct the public hearing, or do you want further research and table it to a subsequent meeting?
Thanks, Corey. Very helpful. Does anybody have any questions for Corey Spencer?
So just a few questions on your language, and Lisa, you chime in here because you probably work with Corey on the draft.
Yes and
It
no.
was a good debate when we discussed this last on ownership. And I think it wasn't, my position was, well, if you own something, yeah, I guess you could be defined as an owner, only because if for some reason you come from so let's say, for me personally, I come from a family of 7. Let's say mom and dad die and they leave the house for the 7 children, and one sibling continues to occupy it, but all of the siblings own it. That would mean I would have, well, let's make it 8, because that's it's not as many decimal places. That's 12.5% ownership. Okay. Right now, as it's written, that wouldn't work.
Correct, as written.
That's my concern about pegging it to 50%. And I did notice, and help me understand this, because in section 90A1, you say 25%, but in C4, it's 50%. So maybe some clarification on that would be helpful. But I think that related to percentages, just that's my overall discussion I would like to have as a commission is, if you have a family like that where you have more siblings and mom and dad die and you leave it, you've excluded somebody, where I think that's a logical example.
If staff could respond, because we actually talked about that, and I know that was the planning commission's concern. And so initially our ordinance said you had to be a 50% owner. And then we went in and drafted it and said, okay, but if it's in a trust or an entity, then you have to be, I don't know, a certain percent or no percent. But that didn't really seem to be fair. Like, in my opinion, if you own it outright versus a trust versus something. And so we dropped it from the 50% to the 25%. But in my opinion, we need to draw the line somewhere, because I don't think Centerville's ready for an LLC that has 100 people. And this is just, a family of 10, this. So we felt like, just like Corey said, we want to be conservative with this first ordinance out of the gate. And I don't know how many trusts there are out there with people more than 4, but we broadened it from 2 to 4, and there might be some LLCs or trusts that are excluded, but there is a policy consideration, because there will be so many people that own that. Like, that one sibling might stay for a year, and then the next one, and it's just this turnover. And so it seemed like a good conservative line to draw if you want to make that more of a 10%. But I'm not sure that in my mind, there's any distinction in fairness that if you own it in a trust, you only have to own 10%, but if you own it outright, you have to have 25 or 50%. Like in my mind, it should be the same, whether you own it as a person or you own it as an entity, what's that number? And so if you say, well, if you own a 10% interest in an LLC, you only have to own a 10%. And maybe your argument is, well, if they're living there, do we really care? But I do think that there's some potential for abuse of some large numbered LLCs owning and, you know. So,
Could they, in his
C4 does need to be
example, could
corrected
they
by that.
request a waiver? Could they say, this is our specific situation?
I think you need to draw the line. I mean, what's fair is fair. I know we always
Yeah.
have these waivers, yes. I don't like them in ordinances because they just create an exception
Yeah,
for the
you don't want
person
to
that's
create
willing to
that
apply.
precedent because somebody will say, hey, you did it for so-and-so and now you're saying I can't do it, and that's, that opens ourselves up.
So I agree, and that's where, the question is, how many 10-person trusts are there in Centerville? I know there's a lot of trusts, but, and if you want to move that number up, you can, but, Corey and I had a pretty good debate about where that should be, and I know we're excluding some of those large numbered percentage ownership, but this is a right for an ADU, and we could define ownership as 100%. So,
Yeah.
it seemed like a fair, reasonable compromise, but the planning commission can certainly recommend a higher number, or a lower percentage.
Does anybody have an opinion on that?
Do we want to finish asking questions?
Yeah,
to
let's
staff
ask
first
questions.
and
So then my other question would be on, go back to 50, where are we at?
So let's ask that question maybe. On C4, it talks about the 50%.
Needs to be changed to
Does that need to
Okay,
be
yeah,
matched?
those should match,
That
right?
needs to
be- Those should
Sorry,
match.
that, yeah,
Good
we didn't,
catch.
Okay.
So just above 100 on violation enforcement, that paragraph above it, we put out that maximum of 3 years for certain reasons, because people are gone for 3 years for certain assignments in their religious affiliation. I would say 3 years and a few days or something like that. I don't know. It sounds weird, but I have parents and in-laws that both had that type of assignment. So I would say just a few days in addition to that. So 3 years and
Why does it
5
have
days
to
or something like that.
Which section, I'm sorry?
So I'm trying to
E,
identify
temporary owner
E.
absent on 12/16/90.
90, so 90E in the last paragraph.
Oh, right,
Right
right,
here.
okay.
Does that make sense? I would hate that if somebody was gone away on a church assignment, they come back and there was like a day or two past 3 years.
Although what's the enforcement mechanism for that, Lisa?
It says
I
it's
mean,
null and void. Then the internal ADU permit shall be deemed null and void. So
Then can't you just reapply for it? What? Or do you find yourself in a situation where you gotta kick your renters out? and
Well, it
come
would
back
just be
in?
if we changed the ordinances, and then they would be non-conforming, then they wouldn't have their vested right in it. I think that would be the risk, but yeah.
that's why if we just add a few days for float,
Can we go to a nice round 40 months or something like that?
Just to kind of,
yeah, I don't
doesn't
care.
even
I just
say-
thought because of personal experience, maybe you
But
get a
for
little float in there.
example, he just
That was one of the thoughts I had.
yeah, just my thoughts into it. I did not put in a one-time only waiver because I realize that there are some that may do multiple opportunities. So I did not. Or
Yeah.
customary obligations, whatever you want to call them.
So you could reapply for the waiver.
That's a loophole, I know it's there. I just didn't announce it really loud because I know that a lot of the elderly individuals may do a
Come and
few
go.
of their stints.
Yeah. So
Okay.
that was one question I had for staff and the commission. Then I think on the impact fees, I agree with staff that we shouldn't charge an additional impact fee because when the home was built, they already paid an original impact fee. And so if they have children move away and somebody comes and takes it, it's almost like you double charge them for something they've already charged. I think that's onerous. So I agree with staff on that between all this. So that's all I have, Kevin.
Okay. Anybody else have questions for staff?
I just have a question. I know there's ones already out there. Would they have to apply, or are they just grandfathered in that they're just?
Well, that's a question that's always perpetually asked. The answer to date, unless somebody finds some ordinances, ADUs have never been allowed in the city, so they've never been legally established.
There's no grandfather.
So there's no grandfather or nonconformity, so they would have to apply. And now that will be difficult, because this addresses only the internal ones, not the external ones that are operating in the city. I didn't feel like we should go down the external ADU route at this point.
No, I agree. We're focused on one thing.
So do you have a, like, process for code enforcement to go educate these unauthorized ADUs?
Just complaint-based, right?
Complaint-based at this point. City does not aggressively go out and monitor. I mean, if I went out every day, what I see, I could create a whole code enforcement department
Yeah, and you could fund some new
and
parks
fund
for
that,
us.
and nearly fund that code
You could fund a
enforcement.
lot.
New landscape opportunities through that.
I am not opposed to code enforcement.
But we call it in the nickname, and I don't mean to insult anybody named Tom, but we always call them Ticket Toms. And,
Yeah, that's a separate conversation that I don't know that we want to have right now.
yeah,
but,
but I think certainly we would be available, once this is adopted, that if somebody wanted to have an understanding, we should be service-oriented to help them understand where they're at into the process and what it takes to come back into compliance. The one advantage you have, other than the detached units out there, is you don't have all the other building codes and stuff to come in. So that was the major complaint a few years back about costing individuals that might do something in their home that have to update all the fire codes. Now, that doesn't eliminate some of the fire safety. Your exit windows, if you have a non-conforming unit for an exit window, the state didn't go in and say, oh yeah, let them try to fit outside that 2x2 window. But the typical remodel fire codes you still have to do your egress.
perfect. Anybody else have any questions? I do like, I thought it was amusing that the petitioner was the state of Utah. So,
Yeah, that was my little take on it, so that people would realize that we're not doing this just because we got fancy one day and decided to take this up.
nice. Okay, then let's move along. This matter has been scheduled for a public hearing, so we will take this opportunity to open this up to the public to speak to it. Seeing nobody wishing to address this matter, we will close the public hearing, and we will turn the time back over to the Planning Commission to discuss these issues. I think we got, for sure, two items that I think we'd like to talk about as a commission. The ownership percentage and the occupancy waiver, how we want to address those. Leave them alone, address any adjustments as pointed out by Commissioner Summerhays. My thoughts, well, let's hit these one at a time. On the ownership percentage, I do agree with Lisa that at some point you do have to draw a line, but I think that now is our opportunity to figure out where that line is. My background, my professional background has typically been in these types of situations where you have multiple ownership, it's 20%. That's where I've usually worked, is that anything 20% greater is considered an interested party. But I'm open to something, less than that. Spencer makes a good case for his large family, if we wanted to address that one or not. And I'd be interested to hear what other people have to say about that, where you feel about it. So, thoughts?
I fall into the appreciable interest column, right? We want somebody that has an appreciable ownership interest, and I'm a little less concerned about the line drawing. I would be comfortable with 25. I would be comfortable with 20. I think I'd probably start to get a little uncomfortable under 20, only because I think there is some benefit to starting conservative. And we can always come back and make changes to our code if we're starting to get people in that suggest that it's a problem. But I tend to favor the let's start conservative and see what happens and make changes going forward. So, but as between 20 and 25, I don't have strong feelings.
I agree, I think either 20 or 25, I like the little drawn line.
Okay.
I feel bad for people with big families. It just seems irritating. Like if I'm part of a big family, which I'm not, but if I was, I would just be so irritated with the city. Like, why? That makes no sense. I was born in a family of 7, they're born in a family of 4, they get 2, I don't. That makes no sense. Like, so I don't know what kind of language you could put in there to make that equal and fair for those 2 families. If there's some language about being related, everybody in the trust or LLC has to be related. I don't know if that's allowable, but it just feels discriminatory to say, well, we're kind of discriminating against big families. It's not their fault they had that many sisters and brothers versus the other. So it just doesn't feel fair.
From a practical standpoint, if Corey is right, we're only talking about 1% of the units in the city, and then of those 1%, how many are likely to have this kind of a scenario? It seems like a fairly unlikely.
1,000,000%.
Yeah, it seems like a fairly unlikely. I'm not that I don't appreciate your comment. I'm just thinking from a practical standpoint. I think that this will practically impact not a ton of people, but.
Yeah, sorry, are you done?
Yep, that's it. I ended on a preposition, so yeah.
No, I agree with you on that one, and I hear what you're saying. It definitely does feel very unfair on that approach. I think one of the other things we need to consider in this case is what is kind of the message that we're sending, not just to the city council, but to the public in general about the permissibility of it. We're going from not allowed at all to what level of permissibility on it, right? And I feel like, 20 or 25 sends a message that, yeah, we're gonna allow it within some restraints. If we go 10% or certainly anything less than that, that feels like no limit in a lot of ways, right? And that almost sends a message to the city council and to the public that, it's a free-for-all.
Yes.
Right? And so I think that's something that we should consider as a planning commission.
And I'm not tied to a number, I'm just trying to provide a practical, real-world example of
Sure.
of my family. So, and again, I don't live in the world of trusts and estate planning, so I would defer to some of your experience. And does that number, do we go to 12 and a half? Do you go to 10, or do you just say, no, we're gonna go to 20? Again, I'm not married to a number, I'm just trying to provide a context for that rationale.
I mean, I am intrigued by the idea of including something about relatives. I think that that's a clever way of maybe approaching it, although then I start thinking, well, what's a relative? A sibling, a cousin, a second cousin, a third cousin on the left side, and
What is
Especially
the
when you're dealing
definition of
with,
immediate
when you're dealing with
family?
trusts and family.
I think we open
It's
ourselves up to some.
I agree.
That's a can of worms, that's a Pandora's box for sure, that I don't know that we want to get into.
And I
You
don't,
could say immediate family members, I don't know.
But does that include in-laws?
I think I would still be inclined to start fairly conservative, and if we do run into these problems, I mean, we can always amend, down the road if it looks like it's gonna be an issue, so.
Well, that's why I initially said, well, could they apply for a waiver? Could they petition and say, hey, guess what? We have 6 brothers and sisters and we all want to,
Could you add a line, Lisa, and you're gonna hate me for this? There's a word in the legal world, commercially reasonable, standards. Can we put a reasonable standard of familial associations clause in that?
I do have some concerns about
Okay,
it.
for kind of what
If you really want,
was
I
talking
mean,
about?
go to 10, I'd rather have a number.
Yeah.
It's more
It's easy.
sustainable, legally supportable, it's fair for everybody. you know. I mean, I would be, if my parents left the house to all of us, we wouldn't be able to have an ADU, but, you know. So, you know,
Cross that bridge
I
when you get there.
understand that, but, you know,
Okay.
I guess, I'd rather just, yeah, go lower than,
Okay.
I'm supportive of 10, 12 and a half. Frankly, I'm supportive of 20. It doesn't fit within my personal example, but I lean more towards the 10 or 12 and a half. I do agree with Lisa. I think it's easier from an enforceability and transparency standpoint to say it's this number, period, end of story.
So based on kind of the conversation we've had, and I'm just gonna, you know, make a call here, and we can obviously change this later, but I think when it comes time to make a motion, I'll make a motion for 20%, and we'll match the two sections on it. If we want to make an amendment to, a motion to amend, we can do that. But that's where I think that it feels like we should start.
Okay.
So,
Yep, you have 3 that feel that way, so I don't disagree.
well,
Before you make your motion.
yeah, I'm not gonna make a motion, because we still have,
We have some other things.
we have some other things to talk
Okay.
about, but I'm just saying that that's where I feel like we'll go with that one.
Okay.
Let's talk about the occupancy waiver on, I lost where that went.
Oh, it's,
Yeah, what section is that?
it was
7.
90E
Go down.
last paragraph.
Okay. Yeah, page 7, Lisa says.
Yeah.
So for a maximum of 3 years. Now, two things, obviously, Corey mentioned that you can reapply for it. No big deal, I guess.
Except that you might be out of the country and it's a pain.
Might be a pain to reapply. So what, you know,
Could you go to like someone and say, hey, this is my thing, I'm gonna be gone just a little more 3 years? Could you give them a little leeway, knowing that they will be gone?
Oh, I'm so difficult that, you know, I want to get myself set up for being fired. No. No, what I think of is if somebody was, if I'm looking at it from a zoning administrator and being reasonable with the, because again, the zoning code says, hey, there's not every situation. So there's an allowance for the zoning administrator to have some discretion and always appealable to the Board of Adjustment if you step outside of it. To me, it's an effective date. When do you want the effective date to be? You know, if they effective date 2 weeks after they leave, no big deal to me, from my
But
interpretation.
if you're like me, I want to have everything in order before I leave. And I'm saying, well.
Well, I think you can apply and just make it effective date. This is
Yeah,
when I'm,
that's true.
this is the time I'm leaving.
But
the
that leaves it
effective
up to
date
the
is
zoning
this.
administrator to keep that in their memory bank at all times, saying, oh, hey, by the way, when we discussed this 4 years ago, we talked about, we probably want to have the effective date two weeks after you leave.
I'm sure you're gonna have some kind of form or something that'll,
Yeah.
and you put effective date on the form and, right?
Yeah, I mean, we can do something like
But
that. I
then-
mean, I don't, that's me understanding what it's like to be in an enforcement situation. But I'm not gonna try to pull the wool over your eyes. You know, I am 56, and so that means at some point I'm leaving. So what does the next zoning administrator do?
Corey, did you recently have a birthday? Was that why we were talking about your age so much?
No, I got made fun of yesterday.
You're only old once you stop playing.
Okay. Anyway,
I had to endure some haranguing from my kids. They turned 30, the two of them have turned 30, so.
Wow, you really are old, Corey.
Oh,
No, I'm just kidding. Come on, man, he like left that wide open. Okay.
okay. So, I guess the thing is, even if you put an effective date on it, I don't know. We're really honestly talking about days usually, right?
Correct.
And if it's gonna be more than days, maybe they need to just reapply or something. I don't know. I don't really feel strongly about it. I'd be interested to hear what everybody else has to say.
Do they get a notice? Hey, your 3 years is almost up. Remember, you need to reapply if you wish to continue. Or is it 100% on them to remember? They have to.
That is a awesome question. And the answer is the ordinance is always listed that it's the burden of the property owner.
I'm just really bad
But
for getting.
customer service wise, we do some things to try to help people along.
Yeah.
ordinance-wise,
In the spirit of the ordinance, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, when we're not swamped and we remember, we'll notify people that their plat might be, their plat is coming up. You need to start recording or getting close to it, but it's hard to stay on top of those kinds of notices for every application, so. But we do try. I mean,
Is there a fee
despite his
associated
age,
with
Corey's a
this?
nice guy.
Okay, do we anticipate a fee for the waiver?
Well, that's what we haven't gotten to, is now that we implement it, is there a charge fee to process? Usually the city will do a minimal amount of fee to cover the staff time to process, but
I would hate to charge a fee for military assignment,
Right.
medical, illness, sabbatical leave, whatever.
So one of my thoughts along those lines with the fee is, sure, we're gonna ask somebody to affirm that they're on a military assignment or medical or whatever else it is, but how do we kind of prevent that somebody doesn't just abuse this and it does really become non-owner occupied in perpetuity, I know that even if it's like a $50 fee, that's not gonna prevent somebody from doing that, especially if they're making pretty good money off of it, but I don't know.
It's a good question. Maybe you revisit if it becomes a problem, like, I don't know.
Lisa has a thought, I can tell.
No, I was just thinking that was a great comment.
Well, what if, do we get around that by, right now, the only word temporary is in one, a temporary job relocation, but temporary is only limited to that and none of the others. So what if you change that and you say that the requirement upon submitting in written evidence showing good cause requirement upon submitting evidence, it's submitting in writing evidence of temporary whatever, such as, and then temporary is applying to all of them, and if people are continually doing it, then it's not temporary, by definition.
I like that.
I like that too.
How about that?
Comma after in writing.
Wow, that was really hard to spell. Glad y'all figured that out.
That's why I tell my kids, read punctuation.
Ay, ay.
Showing temporary,
Good cause of temporary absence, is that?
good cause of temporary absence.
Yeah,
Yes.
such as.
Yeah.
And with regard to the timing, I mean, my OCD kicks in a little bit at the idea of doing 3 years and a little bit. I don't know why. But I also look at it in educational pursuits. I mean, somebody could leave to try to get a 4-year degree. That's 4, not 3. So, I mean, maybe instead of going 3 years, you throw it up to 4 years and then we've covered the bases.
That's a good point. I mean, if you're going to med school.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay. And it has to be evidence in writing anyway, so I don't see a problem with that. I
Still,
think you kind of cover the gamut then.
I think that it's going to be the exception.
Yes.
it
on
will,
all
I think
of
it will be the
these.
exception.
I like that. I like that, Shannon. Good point.
You don't like 40 months? Come on.
Oh, no, that was like nails on a chalkboard to me, guys.
Yeah, 40. I was like, 40? Where did Kevin come up with 40?
The other one that I wanted to raise in this category is that right now it's listed as under subsection 3 for medical or other care of other family members or relatives. Why are we limiting it to family members and relatives? Why not close friends? Why not non-relatives? Why do we care about why do we care about the familial relationship as the reason for the leave? Because if we just said to, such as for medical or other care, I'm not quite sure what other care is, but we could collapse 3 and 6, and that could be your personal illness, that could be you leaving to care for somebody else's personal illness, but as I got thinking about it, I wasn't sure why we wanted to limit it to a family. If somebody wants to leave to take care of somebody else who's
Aunt Betty, who
business
may not
is
be
ours.
your Aunt Betty, but has
Right.
become your Aunt Betty because she was a neighbor and she was awesome to you as a kid. Yeah, right.
yeah, the thoughts just go back to finding a threshold. I mean, I write ordinances somewhat knowing how people manipulate the system. I already know 2 individuals in the city that are already tapping in with the internal ADU unit, trying to figure out a way around, and are querying me nearly every week about when this gets adopted. and I know their behavior traits and what they do. And so, the issue is sure, I'm taking care of Ed and Sally and Betty and it seems like that becomes an unreasonable excuse at some point in time. And if you're taking care of someone and you're 10% ownership into it, or 20% ownership, there's other family members involved that can also take care of in that. I just think trying to expand it to where somebody can abuse it is where I'm the threshold's pretty broad. You work-related, you can take off with work for family and bereavement, but you can't take it off necessarily for your best friend. And that best friend might be closer to you than a family member. So it's just a parameter, just a
Yeah.
parameter.
On this one, I go back to, if only 1% of the homes are gonna even have ADUs, the likelihood that somebody would take advantage of this is gonna be fairly small. On this one, I think that I could personally get on board being a little less restrictive. If somebody has written evidence, because we are requiring them to provide written evidence that this thing is happening, I think I would be comfortable expanding it beyond family members or relatives. If somebody could say, I have to leave to go take care of another person regardless of their relation. But I think that's just me.
I could support that.
I can.
Okay.
I think the written evidence is extremely important and good to have it.
Yeah, and I mean, we're not saying what exactly that written evidence is, right? It's,
Could just be me saying, I am going
I'm
to.
going to take care of Aunt Betty. But, I don't know, they gotta make an effort.
Yeah, I mean.
Yeah, they'll have to
that's-
supply the medical records to us.
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding.
I mean,
I'm totally joking on that one. I know how again, written evidence.
Yeah.
What does it mean?
Exactly.
or a physician's note. I mean, if you're gonna go that, you don't have to request medical records, but you could at least, physician evidence is
Yeah.
required for many things,
I
so.
think if we're allowing the zoning administrator to enforce this, isn't there an allowance for determining what appropriate written evidence is?
Yes, and then it's subject to appeal, too.
Yeah,
Subject to appeal.
I think we're taken care
So I
of.
was just wondering if, let's say if I leave for 4 years, can I rent out this other unit now?
You mean, you essentially have two ADUs, is that what you're asking,
Primary
Lisa?
unit?
Or do you want something in here that says, yeah, you can go for 4 years, but you can't rent both places?
Yeah,
out?
so that's what you're asking, you're saying, okay, you've rented the basement as your
Or
internal
either,
ADU.
you've rented your ADU, are you now also allowed to rent your primary, because it eliminates the owner occupancy, and I don't know, I guess that's just my
And
question.
how do you define rent, right? So I leave on a sabbatical and I have my son come stay in my home, but I want to continue having my ADU and my son is paying me some nominal level of rent.
Yeah.
Is that rent?
$10.
Paying utilities
Yeah.
or something.
Yeah, right, paying utilities.
That's an interesting question, though.
Another threshold to debate.
I don't
Anyway,
know
but
that,
yeah, it certainly could be, I guess if you're saying 1%, but it could easily be abused, at 4 years at a time, you'd have 2 rentals, but anyway, set it where you want, because,
Do we have a good landlord program in Centerville? That if I'm a
We-
renter, I have to be part of the good landlord program and I have to have a business license?
not
We,
yet.
we don't, and it's funny you mention it. On the heels of that is an email that came to me this morning about some of the rental units out there, who's doing it, running into some money, buying some more.
Yep.
And a good landlord program, we don't have, and I don't know if the council, even though they are asking questions about it, are willing to fund its implementation, given the other parameters that they want. But
I should
it's
know,
funny
I
that
should
that
know this,
came
but
up.
what is a good landlord?
Yeah, that was
program?
gonna be my,
Oh.
step back one and tell me what a good landlord program is.
So,
On a municipal level, I guess.
once, I'll tell you a story. Once I owned a house in Ogden, and I didn't want to live in it anymore, but it was right after the previous crash, and so I couldn't sell it for what it was worth on my mortgage. So I rented it. In order to rent a home in Ogden, I had to buy a business license yearly. I had to attend a good landlord weekend seminar, pass their test, and then follow the practices I learned in the Good Landlord program, which was doing a background check before you rent, taking a deposit, having a solid contract that they could help provide with the tenant. And then it gave you were a part of that program, and then if things went south, they gave you the tools to evict and helped you with the eviction process, so that it was a goal to try to bring the level of people that are allowed to rent within the city up a notch in.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, Heidi, how did you feel about it as a landlord?
I loved it.
Okay.
Because then it gave me more power, because then I could say, I don't want to rent to you. I don't have to rent to you.
Right, based
It
off a
gave me-
background check or-
It gave me the ability to choose based on my personal requirements that I set, and you could set that within, your own parameters of who you're willing to rent to.
And if I'm a neighbor to a landlord, I probably like that as well,
Yeah.
because it sets that same standard.
Let-
The question then is, how do you?
Yeah, let me add to that,
How do you
and then-
enforce it and who pays for it?
Let me add to that, and then just a counter argument, just for the fun of debate. It's not intended anything against what you said, because I
Those were
sometimes
just-
can say
it was a
something,
story.
and people are like, oh, what does he do? The first thing is the Good Landlord program is a reduction in the cost of the fee being charged to you as a landlord. So what Ogden City, South Ogden cities have done is they evaluate how many calls are going on, what's the cost to the city, what's that fair share impact happening with all of these rental units, and given crime, whatever the issue social services, whatever the issue may be. And the fee is based, to be a landlord, the fee is based on that amount. Now, to reduce that amount, you go through the Good Landlord training program to reduce that amount, and then it's a substantial reduction.
Yeah, I think my
in the
business
amount.
license was like $10 versus like $250.
Right. So the incentive is to get him into the Good Landlord training program, and that's where I think Centerville would have to come up with, what are we doing, how do we do that, how do we enforce it? Because what happens is, in the Good Landlord program, the fire official goes out, the police chief goes out, the zoning administrator goes out, you're checking and inspecting your property for violations and problems from codes to zoning. And once you rectify all of that, you get a reduction in your license fee for it, and it is an annual fee to it. The only counter argument, for just sake of debate, yes, I agree, it helps with the landlord. I worked for Ogden City when they began to institute that. I wasn't there when they finalized everything to it, so I didn't personally do the program. But Ogden City had a lot of problems with the renting community, because there's a lot of product that was bought up in the single-family neighborhoods by investors. And the investors weren't necessarily your big apartment-type investors where they're doing 200, 300, 400 units. These were landlords, entrepreneur, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 11, 12, some of them 20, 30 units. And they weren't managed well. So it does give you the tools to manage them well. The counter argument is too, though, is that program in its aggressive status eliminates most likely housing for those who may have committed a felony, have been released, and are back out trying to find housing. And so that's a downside of the Good Landlord program, is it can begin to discriminate against those who are trying to get back on their feet from a rough program. And it's meaningless for a personal debate about it. It's just, that's a consequence of the bad side of the Good Landlord program.
So, okay, let's,
Tangent, but it was
let's
fun.
refocus for a second. First of all, unless somebody can tell me where the Good Landlord program directly ties into internal ADUs, let's come back to the internal ADUs. It's a good conversation. I'm
And we're going to be having it in
I'm
the
intrigued
future,
by
at
it.
least with the council, just so you know. It was
Well,
great.
I think what Heidi's saying is,
I
are
think-
you gonna put a provision in your ADU ordinance that says you need to go through a Good Landlord program, and if you do that provision,
So
then
that
you have to set it
so you
up?
can have double rentals, right? So you can rent it out while I'm gone on my sabbatical. I can rent it and the ADU out.
Or even if you're gonna rent your ADU, is that kind of
Or
where you're
even if
going?
you're gonna rent your ADU.
So I think until the city has a good good landlord program,
Yeah.
we don't put it in here. But if we do implement a good landlord program, we'll come back and add it to this.
And I think the enforcement mechanism right now might be just a complaint from a neighbor that says, hey, you and/or your renter are being a nuisance, and these are the nuisance, you know, that are happening, and then that, you're more of a complaint base at the time being.
So then back to, yes, Lisa's question is, if you apply for a waiver, is there anything that prevents you from essentially renting a duplex?
Okay, let's think, I've been noodling on this one. I'm so glad that you raised this question, because it was not something that I'd been thinking about. If I am a homeowner right now without an ADU, and I'm gonna leave to go on sabbatical or educational or whatever, is there anything that would prohibit me from putting my house up, my primary residence up, on Airbnb or Vrbo?
Well, you can't do short-term rental.
You can't do short-term, you'd have
Okay,
to do
even-
30 days
So
plus.
even right now, as a non-ADU homeowner, I can't put my house up for short-term rentals.
Correct.
But you can
Under
do long-term
center.
rental.
But you could do it long-term. You could put it up on
Okay.
Vrbo
Anything
and
more than
say
30 days.
30 days or more,
Got it,
yes.
okay, because I was thinking, if I'm a clever, if the answer had been no, I was thinking, if I were a clever homeowner, I leave, I have my ADU as my long-term, and then I Vrbo my primary residence. So, okay, never mind, that was one of my concerns,
But you can rent your primary on a long-term basis.
yeah.
Already. And then
Already.
you would have your ADU, and that's to Lisa's point.
So now you're not owner occupied. Well, but, okay, so here's the thing, is if we were to,
But again, you're still having to provide evidence.
In my opinion, the way it's drafted, you could rent it out. And I just want to make sure that that's clear with everybody, because it's essentially eliminating the owner occupancy requirement. So for that time period, well, you don't have to live there for the ADU, but yeah, I guess,
so you could rent it out, but it would require a waiver and it would require written evidence.
That's correct.
And at the end of 4 years, it would require a reapplication.
So let me bring it back full circle to an example. You could have mom and dad leave on sabbatical, son or daughter and their family rent the main floor of the
Primary,
house
yeah.
while an ADU is still being rented. I'm comfortable with that because of the evidentiary requirements.
Yeah, I think there's enough extra work in there that it's
Yes.
just not gonna be something that an investor's gonna wanna have to put up with. Maybe they would, but,
Just ask the secretary to do it.
yeah. But there's an administrative cost to it.
well, that's why I think the further out you go with the waiver, the more incentive it is for people to try and play the game. I mean, 2 years is typical, but the 3 years, and I think it's just,
How do you feel about 40 months?
I was gonna say 37, let's just solve Spencer's problem, done, 37.
I'm just kidding, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
maybe I just don't care. I mean, no, like, let me explain that comment.
thrown in the
Because-
towel.
No,
I
because
know, I'm
look,
joking.
I mean, if I don't have a problem with somebody going on a 3-year mission and having their son or daughter come stay over, why do I care as between a son or daughter renting something for a nominal amount versus somebody else? They can't do it on a short-term basis. It's not gonna be a Vrbo, it's not gonna be an Airbnb. It's probably gonna be somebody else that is looking to stay there for
And
the
that's
long
what
term.
I have felt,
And
and
it's
we've
net,
talked about it more.
and it's net neutral, right? Either it's the primary homeowner, or it's a relative, or it's somebody else that's renting it, but still, somebody's gonna be living
It's-
there, and
it's
it's not
n-
gonna change.
it's not gonna be transient, which I think
Yeah.
is a lot of the concern.
correct.
So,
Yeah.
sure. I think this is a good discussion. I don't think that it's necessarily something we need to worry about. That's my opinion.
Although, the lengthening of the absence, I mean, I hadn't thought about that incentivizing people to play with the system. Maybe I should just get over my OCD and say 37 months, because it would reduce that risk. I could get on board with 37 months. It would solve the,
Well, or you could go in and say effective date here and move it back.
Well, but that's the thing, is that people don't always leave and come back on the same day, 3 years apart, right? So you need a little bit of a cushion.
Yeah.
That's where the 37th month comes in.
And having witnessed it myself, they have their minds on a lot of different things coming and going, so. But to your point, Shaylin, what if it's med school and it's a 4-year med school?
Then you have
Then
to
apply, then
reapply.
reapply.
Then you
Yeah.
reapply.
Yeah, and I don't have a problem with that. I can get comfortable with, I thought I was OCD. I'm comfortable with 37.
Well, I was gonna say, the 37's a prime number, right? That's I hate primes, those are wrong.
3 years and 1 month?
There we go. Doesn't that
Does that sound
a
better?
lot better? Yes, 3 years and 1 month.
Well, I don't know, because then it depends. If it falls on February, then it's only 28 days versus.
That's fine. 3 years
Had
and 1
enough
month.
31-day months to
I like
compensate
actually
for it.
3 years, 1 month better.
Yeah.
That's how I work in the real estate world.
For what it's worth, that comment about why do I care, who is living there, I think, to me, is why it's the right answer, Corey, when we're talking about not trying to twist ourselves into pretzels about the density calculation or about the impact fee, because who cares, right? Either it's my kid living in the basement apartment while he's going to school, or it's somebody else, and, why is that a difference from an impact standpoint if it's my kid versus somebody that I'm renting to? The answer is it's not.
Yeah.
What I do see is this is not the kind of debate the state legislature had. We get down on that implementation level, and now we see how it affects us. So this is a really cool discussion to see how we think it impacts our community.
Yeah. All right, is there anything else that anybody would like to talk about? Any other concerns?
Do we have a proposed motion with this one?
Yeah, there is, if you go back.
Is it at the beginning? Thank you.
But I didn't have any reasons for action.
Yeah,
Oh, I left it pretty broad because I didn't know if you were going to be ready or whether you wanted to table.
Great, I'm ready.
I think we're ready.
I'm ready.
Go for it.
Yeah, go for it.
Well, okay, let's talk real quick about reasons for action. I think that we should come up with at least a couple. I mean, and
You
honestly.
could say to his one,
Because the state's requiring it?
Complies with state law.
Yeah, that's a better way to say it, because the state said so.
And implements our modern income housing goals.
yes, yeah, that's right. On number 1, on just factors to be considered in the,
And what did you say, Corey, implements?
modern income housing requirements.
Yeah. Housing requirements. Okay, that's good enough. All right, then then I'm gonna go ahead and make a motion.
Wait, can I
Oh,
make a comment before you make your motion?
You bet.
Because I have a couple of minor nits, so if you're gonna be making the motion, pick them up as we go. Subsection, on page 5, so this is in 80, section F. Design needs to be italicized just to match all of the others. Headings, all of the other headings.
okay,
You're gonna do 20%, right?
20%.
On page 7, under the waivers, I have rephrased that just to say medical or care of others. On 3,
Okay,
medical or care of others.
and eliminate 6?
And then, no, I think I'm okay leaving in 6, but illness shouldn't be capitalized.
Lowercase, yeah,
Yep.
lowercase.
Lowercase I.
Yep.
And then the 3 years should be 3 years and 1 month.
Yep.
Okay.
If we're doing Harvard Law Review, I will also say, this is fantastic.
What?
It's awesome. 60B, should owner be a defined term in that, Lisa? Is occupied by capital O owner in accordance with owner occupancy requirements?
Where are you looking?
Sorry, it's section 60, I'm gonna say 1260-60B.
1260-60.
What page?
So that's page 2, sorry.
Oh, no.
Should that be capital O owner, Corey, Lisa, as a defined term?
Do we use owner elsewhere?
Yeah, so that we define, well, in the section about owners.
But we don't capitalize the term owner. Yes, it's capitalized in the heading, but it's not capitalized here in
We
the
don't have to
definition.
do
don't
that as a
define
defined
it.
term.
No, I don't think so.
But we do want to put on 60C,
Internal L.
put an L on internal.
Yes, that was my other one.
Okay.
on.
I
Oh,
wasn't gonna
yeah.
say anything when you started saying those. I like, okay, well,
Well,
I'll
if we're,
pitch in.
I mean, if we're like picking out things, I can't help myself.
Okay,
Resident Grammarly.
anything else?
I just didn't
Shayla?
know if that was like a defined,
No,
owner
sorry.
was a defined term.
I didn't want to
capital.
have to get into, will you accept friendly amendments? So I thought
Yeah,
if we
that's
can clean it
good.
up front, then it makes it easier for our recorder.
I'm not sure I understand your point, Spencer, but if you're just talking about how we mention owner in the definition, typically we keep it, we don't capitalize it,
Okay,
but the
so it's not like a
definition
defined
itself is
term.
capitalized.
Okay, okay.
Yeah,
If that's the question.
okay.
And then hopefully throughout, usually we'll do a search and make sure that we do capitalize owner occupancy, so you know it's a defined term.
All right, I hereby make a motion for the planning commission to recommend approval of the proposed zoning text amendment for internal accessory dwelling units, as written in the staff report, or as provided in the staff report, with the following changes. On page, I gotta find it now. On page 5, 126090A1, we'll change both of those 25% to 20%. And then on page 6, C4 will be 20% as well. And then on page 7, the subsection E, the last sentence of that one, nonetheless, an owner may receive a waiver of the occupancy requirement upon submitting in writing evidence, where'd it go, showing good cause of temporary absence, such as, 1, job relocation, so we can get rid of temporary there. 2 is written, 3 that says medical or care of others. And then leave the rest of those alone. And then the other changes that we talked about earlier, Shaylin pointed out, spelling, whatnot.
And in that last paragraph, E,
What was the last?
3 years and 1 month.
Oh, right, almost forgot about that. Yeah, the very last paragraph of E, where it talks about, up to a maximum of 3 years and 1 month. Period. With reasons for action, A, complies with state law, and B, implements the city's moderate income housing requirements.
I will second that motion.
Cool. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further thoughts, comments, discussions, explanations?
I would like to add an amendment to change percentages to 12.5,
Okay.
as discussed.
Do we have a second?
Oh, sorry, we don't have a second.
Okay, the motion fails without a second. Sorry, Spencer. So, okay, back to the original motion then. No other comments?
I will just say kudos to staff. I continue to be impressed with you guys. We are very fortunate as a city to have such outstanding staff. And I think that this ordinance, or proposed ordinance, is evidence of that. Good job, guys.
Thanks. Lisa?
Yeah, thanks. Okay, then let us, we will do this in the usual fashion, I guess, and we'll start on that end down there. Commissioner Summerhays.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Right, the motion passes. Thanks, everyone. That was a very good conversation. We covered a lot of ground, got in deep. But we didn't drown. All right, let's move on to the next item on the agenda. We have another public hearing, legislative recommendation for a zone text amendment to talk about fences and walls, and we'll turn the time over to Corey again.
Thank you, Chair Daly, members of the council. This one you're probably not as familiar with. I don't know if I mentioned it at a previous planning commission meeting. It was coming up. This is a fairly recent action by the city council. A couple of backgrounds so that you have the setting. This was brought up by Mayor Wilkinson. There were owners of property that were constructing a fence in the side yard of a corner lot that faces the street. There was some damage to the city infrastructure. City staff went out, inspected it and said, hey, I don't think this is allowed. Come, you need to talk to the zoning administrator. So had a conversation with the family. They obviously, they were kind, just give them, whenever you enforcement, you always just start out at first, it's sometimes a little rough. They were just like, what do I need to do to comply? But we really need this. So it was just a really gentle conversation at the beginning and ended that way too. But so it led to quite a bit of discussion with them. In constructing this fence, they wanted to add it. They looked around the neighborhood, felt like there were some other fences in the neighborhood that did and accomplished the same thing that they're doing. Did not want I would suppose they didn't want to go through their own process to amend, simply from the fact of, is they didn't want to go point to their neighbors and say, look at so-and-so and look at so-and-so and create a conflict and an argument with them. So they talked to our mayor, and he brought this up at the city council, and the city council came to a fairly quick decision to go ahead and sponsor a text amendment. So that's the history of how we arrived here. It happened just a couple of meetings ago. I slipped it in with this meeting because it's a simple one and didn't want to put it on a long-standing goal chart. So here we are debating this from the council initiating this action. Now the background of the ordinance. I don't know if it was prior to 2003, but it shows up by 2003. The city adopted a whole new zoning code and a whole new zoning, so it got rid of the R110, the R18s, went to low density, medium density, high densities, and reformatted a lot of the parameters. And one of the parameters that came with the corner lot, and it was further refined several years later, corner lots are treated differently, holistically usually, and by our ordinance, from the internal lots. So internal lots are only 60 feet wide. Corner lots, one of the frontages has to be 70. So that's making up some of this difference on the corner lot. The corner lots typically share a front yard. Well, the definition of a corner lot is you have 2 front yards and 2 side yards. So you no longer have a rear yard because your corner is essentially functioning as not the default rear yard, but it's making up the distance of what the rear yard would be for your lot. The setback, what it says in the code is no fence in a front yard exceed 48 inches in height, except for site triangles, you have to reduce them down to the 2 foot if it interferes with the intersection. So that comes about that now fences are no longer allowed on the street frontage where the home is, whatever you define the 25 feet, because we don't define your door facing, and then that other one would default. If you pick 25 on one street, your other street defaults to 20. That would mean that you would frame your side yard areas, since we don't have a rear yard. Some people would call it their rear yard because they put their back door there, but it's 2 side yards. You'd frame your 2 side yards and connecting it back to the setback or house with a 6-foot fence. That becomes your private area. And now your front yards can be done with a 4-foot fence, and that's the semi-private area. So the concept of front yards is that they have a character to a street. They're part of the public space visually, even though they're seen owned by privately, and it creates that uniform neighborhood. And the concept of the corner lot, you get that on the front yard at the 25 feet, that's pretty normal, but now we have fencing restricted on this corner lot going up the other street. And a lot of the issues that come up with allowing fences to go all the way to the property line along the sidewalk, maintenance of the park strip, cities have struggled with in the past. Once it kind of fence off, you start neglecting it. Not everybody, but it's easier to neglect. You have the site triangles associated with the next lot up the street that might have a driveway right on the side lot line that you have your fence on. And so you have site triangle problems. Our fencing ordinance tries to address or our visual triangle is trying to address those, but we don't have that problem if the fence is set back. automatically. We don't have a site triangle problem next to that driveway. And the concept is we can never predict where that driveway is going to go, you know, this side of the lot or that side of the lot. And so the fence pushback solves the site triangle with a fence, so somebody's coming down with a skateboard, somebody's coming out of their driveway, you don't have that conflict necessarily unless somebody's just not visually paying attention. So that's the concept. And you get the additional idea is your side lot on the corner is part of the next street's visual space. So that's the concept. That shows up in 2003. And so we've been implementing this off and on through time because, well, to step back. So prior to 2003, we did allow fences at some point in time on the corner lots. So if you drive out there in the city, you're going to see corner lot fencing going out to the street. The question is prior to 2003 or after 2003? And that's the issue, is there's no permit required for fencing if it's less than 7 feet under the building code. So we have a zoning parameter, but you don't have a permit required. So it's the luck of the draw. Does the owner call the city? Does the fencing company call the city? It's a mixed bag. And I think that's what these residents had faced when they went into doing theirs. They didn't know, and their fencing company didn't know. And your larger fencing companies that have more experience have a tendency, but if you know the price of vinyl, it's over $30 a linear foot, and everybody's jumping on board to put in fences and make some money. And so I know I had a problem with my fence and my fencing company, so I know exactly what goes on now. But anyhow, another story, another day. So you have the mixed bag of fencing. Some historic, some happening in between. Don't call the city. City doesn't go out driving down the road to find out if it's a non-conforming, who's putting up a fence, and fences go up. So the mayor brought this to the council. They decided, hey, we want to go back. And I provided, the mayor had the question, so I provided Syracuse's code. Since I live in Syracuse, I knew they had their fencing code. Again, don't ask me how I know. And it wasn't enforcement, just to be clear for the planner. So the graphic you see in the ordinance is Syracuse's graphic. So now you see, if you use the graphic, that they pick a front yard, so your front yard, again, we don't regulate the door, but they're going to pick a 25-foot setback, that's their front yard. And so now the language is addressing the front yard along the street. So it's a side street yard. I'm redefining that as a side street yard for residential zones. And it's kind of following Syracuse's. I did a couple of quick edits. They only have a 10-foot minimum for the visual site triangle. But if you look at the corner lot, your front yard has a light teal area, for lack of better terms, where you would only have the 4-foot fence. Then the dark teal area, you would have your 6-foot fence. And then Syracuse's ordinance says, hey, but if there's an immediate driveway within 10 feet is their ordinance. I put the 12-foot in to match our current visual site triangle. So that's the change. Syracuse says 10, we say 12. So if you have that site triangle, you'll have to bump that fence back in order to open up that triangle. That's what Syracuse does. Drive down my new neighborhood, there's violations already. So I don't know, whether we're in a preventable situation here, but the one thing I do see out there with fencing is when you have this site triangle, if you bump it back to the 12 feet and they put a 6-foot fence in that L-shaped bump or an angle, if you'll notice particularly, they'll do it with the big green utility boxes. They'll out and around it or cut it off on a corner. Those don't get maintained extremely well. It's kind of, it's my neighbors, even though it's not my neighbors, it's kind of tied to them visually. So there's pluses and minuses, but the plus is that you get additional yard space that you can fence off rather than those little narrow minimum side yard lines that we define our corner lots. One thing that I cautioned the city council on, so I think it's fair to at least caution to the planning commission. This ordinance change would only address the fence. So if you adopt this fencing requirement, it only addresses the fence. It does not address the tough yards to go into that. The setback for tough sheds or other accessory buildings would still be the 20-foot setback. And the reason I brought it up is once you fence it in, it's kind of a territorial possession. And where's the best place to put your tough shed?
Corner.
Right in that back corner along the street. Why would you want it in the middle of your backyard? So this does not address it. I chose not to address it because the council didn't bring it up. And I thought, well, then we'll stick with the 20-foot setback for sheds, knowing that once it goes up to 6 foot, we see a shed going up, now there's another enforcement problem. And sheds, generally we can catch if they get to be any size. If you can tuck them back in the other corner away from the street, it's a little harder to always see the little small tough sheds that get pushed against the property line even though they're not supposed to. But by the time it gets any substantial size. And so sheds are kind of a mixed bag, but as they get a little bit larger, they get caught a little easier because you start exceeding building codes and people start getting worried about things happening in those backyards. So, but fences can go relatively unnoticed. So I just give you that as a caveat. It does not change the setbacks for the sheds. The council didn't bring that up, and I didn't feel like I wanted to try to make an argument against the fencing based solely on the shed issue, unless the commission wants to, because I was just taking this as directed by the council. So that's the text amendment. So the text is trying to describe that. It got really hard to try to describe the parameter, but the idea is that on your side yard from your interior property line, till you intersect that front yard setback, that's your side. Once you intersect that front yard setback, we're now into the 4-foot parameter. So we can include a graphic type. I didn't intend necessarily this be the only graphic. It was just the easiest to cut and paste and get on this agenda. So I'd have to do a custom graphic if we want to add a graphic to it, which I don't think is bad, other than posting it to municipal code online becomes a problem for Lisa because she's the only one that knows how that system works. But graphics are helpful. But by ordinance in our graphics, only the language counts. Nobody can rely on a graphic in our current ordinance as a explanation of the law. So there's recommending it. I went ahead and provided you findings. I think it's a mixed element. I think there's good advantages to it. We don't regulate fences. Lets people have a little bit more private yard space, particularly when our setbacks are narrow at 8 feet on the sides. It gives them some more space to work with, but I think it also introduces site triangle to the next driveway, maintenance issues, and setbacks to buildings. So there's my repetitive trying to explain the world according to I see it.
Thanks, Corey. So real quickly, talking about in your text here, the exception, fences shall not exceed 4 feet in height for a minimum distance of at least 12 feet. So that's only going to be a street or a fence that is parallel to the street, not perpendicular. So that perpendicular one could still be 6 feet.
Perpendicular when you're talking about the front of the home, correct? Kevin?
Well, perpendicular to if you have a site area at 12 feet, it'll run 6 feet along the one side of the 12 feet.
Going old school.
So I'm talking about
Yes, parallel.
this is 6 feet,
Yes,
and this is 4 feet.
correct.
Okay. And then, well, this is kind of, I guess we're assuming this is a lot line, so that could be, is that still going to be 4?
Well, that just shows a garage there. It's assumed lot line to the next house.
It should be 20 feet. The
So-
garage.
The house would go to 25 feet.
Right, the tough shed, which you didn't want to talk about.
Oh, 20 feet, the tough shed, yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm talking about, if you have a garage here, let's say this garage belongs to this home. This home doesn't have a garage up here. So this is still going to be 4 feet, this line here?
Oh, that's assuming another lot, but you're bringing up an issue I didn't address, is if you have a garage with a driveway. I think it says,
Detached.
yeah, detached. I think we'd have to clarify that so that any driveway would need a setback for 12 feet to get that site triangle, whether it's your garage or your neighbor's garage.
I think that's how it's currently written. Is that all driveways need the site triangle?
Yeah, I think it's all driveways
This is,
in the
I
ordinance.
mean, I guess in theory it'd be, if you go back, if you give it 12 feet here, this could be 6 feet as long as you got the 12 feet, right?
Yeah, you could cut out a lane for your detached garage, is what you're making the argument for, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
12 feet on each side of your driveway is a lane of only 4 feet of fence.
yeah, because part of what I'm thinking about there is the visual part of it, well, not the visual, but the sight lines and the sight triangles that you're talking about, is make sure that we can see coming and going from that.
Yeah, so it'd be 12, if that were a detached garage, in theory, on the lot of that house, I think it was intended to be the garage of adjacent lot, but let's just say it's the 20-foot setback to their garage, detached from the house, you're gonna have whatever your driveway width is, plus 12 feet on each side.
Okay,
And it is, and under the current ordinance, it's 12 feet any driveway. I think McKinsey's right.
okay. That's okay. And then, wait a minute, I had another question, but I can't think of it. Anybody else have any questions while I think of my question?
for the record, I know why we're not talking about accessory buildings, but I strongly believe that we as a city need to rectify that going forward, because it's not just tough sheds, it's accessory buildings that are getting really large, and both Corey and I know this
Yeah.
has been an issue for me like 6
And
years in the past.
it's
but
a
it just
new
kept-
issue with someone else now.
and he reached out to me and said, "What are your feelings about this?" And I said, "Well, welcome to my world."
Yeah.
And so I don't know if it's going to be initiated by us at a planning commission level at some future point, or.
It is, just so you know, there are 2 council members requesting it be on the agenda to
Okay.
discuss accessory buildings, so.
Okay.
I don't know the play out, but it is there.
Okay, so let's leave that alone.
So, well, Arvine, are we talking about going back to what we talked about a few years ago, where we were trying to figure out angles and triangles?
No,
and
this one's gonna be
everything?
different. This is
I'm
the
just
issue.
thinking about setbacks
Yeah.
mostly is what
Yeah,
I'm thinking about.
the issue that I think is coming into hand is height and
Yeah.
size.
Right.
In
and I think-
relation to the setback.
But that was the conversation we had before. The conversation was, I don't care if you have a 6,000 square foot accessory building if it's only, 10 feet tall.
Yeah, this one you have a hillside, so it becomes the average height of the final grade, so it bumps it up 5 feet higher. So the building on one side is 29 feet, and less on the hillside. On the others, it's 2-story.
And when you say 29 feet, it really feels like,
50 feet.
well, because it's measured from the average of the peak to the
Yes.
gutter, which,
The other
Because
thing
of the
is,
slope makes it
yeah,
huge.
the other thing I think comes into play is the facility itself is 1,790 square feet, and the home is 2,100 square feet. And so now you have, back to what Spencer and I have had a long discussion about, is Centerville's not chosen to define how accessory is accessory.
the accessory building that is located in my backyard is probably about the size of a 3,200 square foot home.
It's an agricultural, and see, the agricultural idea is we have barns.
And I think from
Everything else like
it's, there's one issue about visual things and just what feels like a personal space encroachment, but there's also, I think, a safety issue in the event that there was a fire in one of these large accessory buildings that don't have the same setback requirements that other similar-sized buildings have. It's one thing to have a fire in a tough shed. It's another thing to have a fire in a 3,200 square foot home that is really only
But Chair Daley,
5 or 6
just to bring up the history, we did go to an 8-foot setback after you reached a certain size, and
Yeah.
that got reduced back to 5 by the council.
Right, I remember that. I remember this council cut it back.
Not, the council passed your option,
But then,
but they had feedback from others saying we don't like it, so the council reversed it to 5. So it went from 3 to 8 to 5.
but back to this one here, kind of the point that you brought up was, especially on these corner lots, where once you fence it in, it feels like this is my space, I'm gonna stick my tough shed out there in that corner. I mean, if it's on the interior corner, it doesn't actually matter then you're up to that 3 or 5 feet setback on that
Right.
corner, right?
Right.
But if you're on that street side, then it should be subject to the 20 feet.
It would still be under this proposal.
Under the proposal,
Would
not
still
as
be.
is, correct? Is that what you're saying?
Well, it's 20 feet now, and it would stay 20 feet, it would just
Oh.
fence it in. And now the question is now that I fenced it in, why would I want to put my tough shed 20 feet back?
Well, then put it in the other corner.
But they're not.
I know they're not.
Yeah, for practical
but that-
purposes.
no, but
That's the point.
You're right, Corey, and that's back to the point that you were making, that if they start building their big, tall building right there on the street, basically, that's easy to spot.
Yeah, and as long as it's 20 feet back, you still have that distance for privacy, but, you know, if people, depending on the size of the tough shed, so an example would be, hate bringing up horrible examples because it just shows you every shortfall in the city. So around Center and, is it 400 East? Around Center and 400 East,
There's an old building there.
there's an old home there, and then there's a building being constructed that is too tall to be an accessory building. And they know that. So they're purposely, one, not putting the kitchen in, so it doesn't be called a dwelling unit. That's how you get around that. And two, they're going to connect it to the old main house with a breezeway when they finally finish.
That's on the corner of First South and Fourth East.
First,
Yeah.
and so we've gotten a lot of calls about that. And that's set back. That's not against the property line, that's set back
That's set back from the street.
from the street, 20 feet. And so now the issue is we'll probably see tough sheds show up in this corner. That's why I bring it up. We're going to see tough sheds thrown in that corner. They're small, they're easy, they're movable. They'll throw them in the corner. Somebody will complain. Code enforcement comes out. Boo, they just pick it up, move it over. And then code enforcement leaves, they pick it up, move it back. And that's how things really work out there with code enforcement. But if you had a more permanent building, that's where the tension's going to come, is they're going to say, oh, I put in a permit. McKinsey and Corey write, 20 feet back, and they're like, it's behind a 6-foot fence, I don't want it 20 feet back. And now we have the debate, and I'm saying, no, 20 feet anyway. And that's where I think the future tension is.
Yeah.
So there's an advantage to help people have some yard space, so long as they don't have a building there. But once they have that yard space and it's private, you always put your structures to the sides of your lots. And that's the first place it's going to go. And I just want everybody to know up front, that's the first place. At least a tough shed's going to show up.
Yeah, but a tough shed, especially one that you can pick up and move back, it's not really a building, is it? It's just a temporary whatever. I don't know.
Does it have a foundation?
Or what they'll do is they put a gate on their 6-foot fence. They buy the Home Depot a canopy carport and plunk it right there and pull their car in through the gate and park it right there.
Yeah?
And you have the Quonset hut building sitting up there that nobody likes. That's in my old neighborhood, sorry. Some people don't like.
Okay. All right. Any other questions for Corey? All right. Then we will move to, this matter has been scheduled for a public hearing as well, and we will open up the public hearing and give anybody an opportunity to speak. Seeing nobody wishing to address this matter, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing. Any further thoughts, comments, suggestions? One ticky-tacky thing on the suggested one. On the very last sentence, when a driveway on an adjacent lot is located, and we need a D there, within 12 feet of the interior lot line on the corner lot. Anyway, other than that, it makes sense. I think it matches the graphic. No concerns.
I would just change the language from exception, comma, fences, which feels a little awkward to me. I would change that to say, except fences shall not exceed.
Okay? without the comma,
Right, with no comma.
okay? All right. Anybody want to make a motion? We're not in a motioning kind of a mood tonight.
I'll make a motion to recommend approval of the proposed zoning ordinance text amendments regarding fencing and walls depicted in red text with an illustrative figure as set forth in staff report with the two grammatical corrections that we caught for suggested reasons A through B.
Second.
Correct. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, we'll start on this end with Commissioner Shigard.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye?
Nay.
Aye.
Okay, the motion passes. Thank you. Let's move along then. We've got land use training. Lisa.
And Chair Daly, I do have to excuse myself at 9 o'clock.
Okay.
Let's
Yeah.
beat that.
Previously scheduled other meeting.
Let's see, I'll put the timer on. Might need 15 minutes, but that'll still get you there. So, okay, so today we're going to talk about Part 6 of the municipal land use code, and I think this has been helpful for me. You know, we want to resurrect our subdivision ordinance rewrite as one of our goals, so this was good to go through. So I think on this one, I kind of want to highlight some of the changes that have occurred in the past few years that are not in our rewrite. But before we do that, I thought I'd at least give you some nice pictures of Patagonia. So this is the southern end of South America in Chile and Argentina. And we did this trip on a self-guided, and so you have to carry your own luggage. That's my sister and brother-in-law. Yeah, we just got kind of dropped off at this town that just starts all the hiking, but anyway. It was, and then this was the little place we stayed. Somebody in our group picked it, so not really high end, but the locals were really nice. So on to the task at hand, let's see. Just like the zoning code, the state law designates that any subdivision ordinance has to come to the planning commission first for a recommendation, which I think is good. And the planning commission by statute has to provide notice and hold the public hearing. Now in Centerville, we also hold a public hearing at the city council level, though not necessarily required. A 2019 amendment, I think we've already talked about this. And here I've just kind of put the bills that change these, but you know, there was some issue in some cities or developers thought planning commission would just stall projects, and so there's a new statute that says that if the planning commission stalls too long, the city council can just consider that a denial and take it up. In that same year, they also said that the legislative body can not only adopt or reject the ordinance, they can also modify or revise. And I think Corey often says this, that you know, yours is a recommendation, but the council can actually look at any other provision and make some changes. So then we get into the plat requirements, and there's a lot of plat requirements that are statutory, and then we have a lot of other in our ordinances that we've added. But to highlight in the plat requirements was HB 107 in this last legislative session, where I think the water conveyance entities and the sewer district got together, and they've lobbied to put a lot more teeth in these ordinances, which essentially puts the burden on the city to now make sure that these sewer district and water line easements are on the plats. I was hoping for some other language that didn't make us the gatekeeper, but anyway.
Lisa, did they sign on all plats already or no?
In Centerville, we don't have them sign the plat. We've talked about that. The only thing we do is we have a will serve letter, but I'm you know, I've suggested it, it just certainly slows down the process. Every time you have to have somebody sign a plat, and I already get a lot of pushback making them get their lien holders, and they're like, but they're in Florida. I'm like, I know, but that's what we do.
And
here.
I've seen that in my professional experience. It varies from municipality to municipality across the country.
Yeah.
How stringent.
Well,
stringent
and
they are.
these do say that, you know, they need to approve the plat, and so anyway, I think we could improve, but I'm hesitant to make developers go and get 10 more signatures on a plat. That's gonna take them 2 to 3 weeks, so. So we haven't done that. But anyway, we do have to make sure that we know existing and recorded underground easements have to be on there, and then, since we've been talking about prescriptive easements and things, but this says that any water conveyance facility that is not recorded, but which you have constructive knowledge of, or it's on the state engineer's inventory, then you have to put that on as well.
What is a water conveyance facility?
Water
Talking about-
conveyance
are we talking about
facility,
Weaver Basin?
yes, I think it's those water conservancy districts and things like that, and sewer districts.
But then when the city, Centerville City, right, with the culinary water, or does that not count?
Yes, but we know, you know, we usually require our own easements.
Okay.
But then we also are required here at the bottom to notify. It used to say canal owners, and this isn't a new notification requirement, but now we call it water conveyance entity or facilities, then we have to notify them if they're even within 100 feet. And then the statute also allows us to require tax clearance, which we do. When I review plats, I always look on the title report and see if there's any delinquent taxes. And if they are delinquent, I require them to get that paid off before I'll sign the plat. And then we're also required to give notice. It's not the automated resource, it's now called the Utah Geospatial Resource Center. So they just changed these terms throughout the code, which means we now have to change the term in our code. So there'll be a few amendments.
Is that for GIS?
Yes.
Okay.
This was interesting, though, is it says that within 30 days of approving the plat, we have to give them, you know, an electronic copy of the approved final plat. Well, we don't get those for a long time after final, so that's kind of interesting.
Do they mean approval as in recording approval or approval within a city
It
council?
just says after approving a final plat, but maybe we could interpret that as signing it. Yeah, maybe it's the
Signing a
final sign.
recordation?
Yeah,
I would
because
say
we don't
even-
have an
I
electronic
would even say
version.
recordation, not even signing, because
Yeah,
it's,
that's a good point. That's the way I'm gonna interpret it. Anyway, the nice thing about going to, you know, a town with dirt roads and on your own is you basically hike for hours and hours with no one around, and it was just amazing. So I've kind of listed some of these hikes, and this, I think, is a picture of Mount Fitzroy, and I don't know if it's this one or another one, but the clothing company Patagonia actually uses one of these skylines in their logo. And we named our dog Fitzroy too, so after this trip. That was cute. There have been some amendments about these bonds that we do for subdivisions, so the developers can either put the improvements in or they can bond for it. That's now what we always call playing in their sandbox. And in 2019, there was some debate about how many options cities have to have for those kinds of bonds. And we used to allow a cash, an escrow, or a letter of credit bond. And now we got rid of the letter of credit because it was just too problematic. And so but we still comply because we offer two options. You can do a cash bond or an escrow account.
what did you find challenging about a letter of credit?
The banks will only issue a letter of credit for 1 year after about 2008. They got a lot tighter on their restrictions, and so we would have to argue that we need a letter of credit for the 18 months they have to build, and then the 1 year. So we basically need it for 3 years, and then so what we did, we would negotiate a clause in there that says, okay, but you'll renew it every year, and then they wouldn't, and then we were saying, okay, well, you better put up another bond, and it is a lot of hand-holding, and we have to send a letter out. I think Mackenzie probably helped on one of these. 30 days before the bond's going to expire, and I mean, 2 out of our, I don't know how many, 5 or 6 letters of credit, we were constantly reaching that limit and sending out a certified letter, so we don't do it. But in 2019, they also enacted some things that Corey often brings up about how the legislature is trying to say that the cities, you can have these bonds for landscaping and public improvements, but you can't really hold up building permit if they comply with, building code and some other things, and they've already bonded. And also that if we have private improvements, so this was a big debate in the land use task force, was, well, wait a minute, should cities be allowed to require bonding for a private street? Like, let's take that Sheffield Downs, it was a complete private street. But we did get in here that we can bond for those because it's public safety. And that, we want to make sure that that gets in because they're going to be selling lots. So anyway, we can, but it was a lot of negotiating on those bonds. Just want to highlight that the statutes do talk about exceptions from plat requirements, and you can actually go all the way up to 10 lots without a plat by statute, but Centerville has cut that off at 2. But as staff, we actually like the plats because we get the easements. It's just such a cleaner way, and we've been talking about even requiring our small subdivisions to even go in that direction because it just saves a lot of headache down the road. And then there's these exceptions for if you want to just divide a piece of ag land that you're currently using for ag, you can divide it. And I was kind of, I knew there was an exception, but that's pretty, they can create a new lot, but it's so problematic because it says, yeah, as long as they keep using it for agricultural use, but we don't know when they stop, and then they sell that to somebody else to build a house on, and then we find out. So we actually need to, if we ever, Corey does a good job checking, did we ever legally approve this? But we wouldn't even have notice. And that might be how some of these were legally divided. But once it's not in ag use, they still have to go through the process. And this specifically says that, the city can require compliance, even if it's 20 years later and it was an innocent buyer, we can still enforce that. Okay, this was another amazing, I think this was the longest hike I've ever been on in my life. So you see the glacier, we still had to go all the way around the corner. It was a 12-hour hike. But in Patagonia, there's big payoff, and it stays light for, till about 11 o'clock at night. So we call them the Patagonia days. It's like 2 days in one. But anyway, this was one of the most spectacular views, and just these glacial lakes. So that was probably my favorite. And I just want to say, Corey, I did this hike. Corey gave me some hiking poles for Christmas one year, and I took them on this hike. I don't even know if you can see it. Anyway, that's not me, but they were right there on the trail. 2017, we had some amendments about common areas. So, if you have a common area, it has to be owned equally by all the owners, or it could be owned by the HOA. But anyway, we have to double check common areas and make sure that there's notations on the plat for those kinds of things. And there's also been more statutes to say, wait a minute, because what was happening is they'd put this common area and then they'd start chopping it up and putting houses on it. And so there is, now there's a little bit more guidance in the statutes about when and how you can sell those, and that if it is a common area, all the lot owners have to have a ownership.
And this would apply to like the Hive, correct, in their common areas?
Yes, yeah. So it can be owned by the association, but usually the CC&Rs say that all the owners have, a one, whatever, how many units there are in that, they'll have that.
12.5%?
Yeah, 12.
I couldn't help myself, sorry.
Yeah.
Then there were a few, the statutes talk about dedication of streets, and this was an interesting amendment in 2019, I guess I missed, but just that if typically if they dedicate a street to us, we're not obligated to build it, and this question has come up where we own the right-of-way and the landowners say, well, build the road. We're like, no, the way it works is developers build the road and then we maintain them perpetually. But anyway, this one says, hey, wait a minute, if the subdivider bonded for it, you can't get out of that. So that's all I think that's about, is that if adequate financial assurance has already been provided, then the city, probably may have to take that money as a fiduciary and build the road. And then, okay, there's been some amendments on how to amend a subdivision plat. And I actually like the amendments from HB 388 in 2020 that, because there was this big debate about if you're going to amend a plat, some cities required you to put the whole plat. And some cities just said, no, just put the 2 lots that you're amending. And that's the way Centerville did it. But this makes it clear that you only have to amend this part. And there was a big debate with the county recorders and who wanted what, and even the counties were doing it differently. So now you can just amend a couple lots. You don't have to have everybody sign it. And let's see. Oh, yeah, just more language for the culinary water and sewer district there in 2021. And then this exchange of title. My worst enemy is lot line adjustments or parcel line or boundary line adjustments or exchange of title. They were all over the code, and they tried to fix this 2 years ago, and it didn't work for everybody, so they came back last year and amended it again. But I think what, developers and citizens are trying to make it easy to move a lot line between 2 lots, but the city has the interest because we have easements along that lot line. It's not so simple to just move a lot. Or do you notify the bank? Does the bank now know they own less property? And so anyway, but the way this was amended in 2021 is that an exchange of title, which used to be a very simple process approved by the zoning administrator, now requires an amended plat. Oh, there we go. So anyway, I suspect this will have some more amendments because, that's the way I read it, is that the conveyance has, you have to record the notice of approval and you have to record the document of conveyance along with the amended plat. So that's a huge, anyway, it makes it really problematic. Anyway, it's very hard to get between Chile and Argentina because they do not get along. It's like a 4-hour border crossing and the 2 border crossings are a mile apart because they don't really want to talk to each other. So you have to go through this one and then you have to get in a different vehicle and go through the next one. So that was kind of fun. And you can see the infrastructure isn't quite what it is. We had to actually get transported in this truck because the road had been flooded. And anyway, that was pretty exciting. We barely made it across. Let's see. We can't prohibit solar panels and things like that. And I just want to give you some. So then we go over into the Torres del Paine in Chile, which if you can only go one place, this is spectacular. And so just these glacial lakes, it's really idyllic. And then here's where we got to stay. It was it used to be a farm and an estate, and then they made it into a hotel. So that was much nicer than the Hotel Canuck. Let's see. Oh, yes, this was kind of good. I like this part, Corey, where it talks about, this makes it really specific that developers can't sell a lot in a subdivision until you've recorded it. And, this says that it's illegal. And even if you record a meets and bounds, that meets and bounds doesn't get over this requirement. It's still illegal, and a city can bring an injunction. And so we deal with this all the time, though. Maverick, I don't know. Lots of developments in the city have, usually the big ones, they'll do these little lot line adjustments while they're trying to work it out, or, and then we go to record the plat, and I'm like, wait a minute, your boundary doesn't match what we had before. So anyway, I was really excited. This must have been amended in 2020 because it's much clearer language. I like it.
Yeah, often, just for a tangent, we get small lot owners, local, and they don't have enough money to construct the improvements, so they try to pre-sell the lots to raise the capital. What happens?
And they do, and now they get around it, I think, though, because they just say, oh, this is a contractual obligation. It's not actually the purchase. So anyway, that's it.
Nice.
My brother-in-law had a timer, so we got to take a fun picture there. But this is the money shot. Look at that. That's the hike on the way to the French Valley. That's it's not even photoshopped.
That's cool.
So there we go. We have 3 more chapters. We have 7, 8, and 9. We'll have to see. Some of them are just appeals and things like that, so we are getting there. But
Yeah.
this was really good, and actually, there's been a lot of amendments to that subdivision chapter, so it was a good exercise. So, thank you.
Perfect. No,
Thanks for the 16 minutes.
thank you, Lisa. That's good. It is very helpful to go through this stuff and make sure we're all up to speed on at least the most important parts of it, so.
Yeah, and when you read through it, you think of all the examples we've dealt with this year, and so
Yeah.
it was nice to read that and to see that there are, obviously, there's still some amendments we need to do, so
Yeah.
we'll prioritize that subdivision ordinance rewrite.
Perfect. All right, let's talk really quickly about Community Development Director's report, City Council report.
Should be really easy. You didn't table 2 items tonight. So therefore, there are no items scheduled for your next meeting. There will be the following likely, but not for this next meeting. So what's your will on that? And then just the council report, the legacies lots 2 and 3, without the office, went to them. They approved the PDO amendment, and they're coming back with the development agreement exhibits. We kind of parsed them out at the council. So they approved the PDO amendment, but they'll come back to the council for the development agreement.
Okay. So really quickly then, among the commission, we could talk about in the next meeting. I will not be here for the next meeting. We don't have anything scheduled. We don't have any training from Lisa. Would anybody be opposed to canceling our next meeting?
No.
Okay. Why don't we plan on that then? Let's just
Cancel the meeting, so send out the notice.
cancel the meeting.
All
Okay.
in favor, aye?
Aye.
Yeah, aye.
Second.
Staff weighs in quickly on that.
I was gonna say, staff gets to vote now.
Just on the adjournment and tabling.
Okay, perfect. Let's move on then to the minutes. It was a pretty hefty meeting we had last time, so 10 pages. Let's go through these quickly, page by page. I think I do have a couple of questions about some of these things. Any recommended changes for page 1? So one thing I do, and I'm going to apologize because I've been out of town for a week. Are we sure? First of all, we have no idea what Barry's last name is for the visitors. Anybody go back and listen to YouTube? And is it George Andrew or was it John Andrew? Anyway.
I know that she goes around and asks them specifically, but I don't know who came in later, and she didn't, obviously, Barry Bonds didn't make it.
Okay.
Sorry, baseball.
That's okay. I mean, how important is it for us to get names right, or do we just kind of?
You want to be right for
Only the
respectful out of them. You want to be respectful. I mean, if we didn't get Barry's last name, then we just put what we have in the
Okay.
record.
Everybody is supposed to sign in,
That's true.
and so I would assume that either he didn't sign in or he signed in and his signature was illegible.
Yeah.
And we just didn't catch when he was introducing his name. Maybe it was illegible as well.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good point. Let's move on then. Anybody have anything else on page 2? Page 3? Page 4? Page 5?
My name is misspelled in line 1.
Nope, I was wondering if you'd catch that.
Or did. It's usually my first name that's misspelled,
Yeah.
but
Okay. Anything else on page 5? Page 6? Page 7? Page 8? Page 9? And page 10.
I move that we approve the minutes as amended.
Second?
Great, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Perfect. I move we adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
I
Aye.
Any opposed? Great, we are adjourned.